Holy Spirit, but very similar, I would say, to the way the Roman Catholic Church is now wants to handle its present controversy about the priests who are involved in some of this, pedophilism and all the rest of it. That they're trying to deal with it as if it were merely a psychological disorder, and not as a spiritual problem, and therefore by counseling and this sort of thing they can deal with it rather than by spiritual discipline. Well, the same kind of thinking is going on with the ecumenical movement, and gradually the Orthodox Church makes more and more statements and becomes more and more involved with it, as I said. One of the big ones was let me see, I'm trying to think of it. There was one in 1948. That's in Amsterdam. And that's when the World Council of Churches is basically founded, and all of the churches of the East basically participate: Constantinople, Alexandria, Antioch, Jerusalem, Greece, and Romania. And they're already getting involved in participating in this thing, not as observers, but as full-fledged members. And then in 1957, in Oberlin, Ohio, there's another one where they talk about the unity we seek. And although the Orthodox Church under Father George Florovsky, who was a very refined theologian in many respects, but got involved with the ecumenical movement, which to a certain extent is a stain on his record, I think, says the unity has never been lost. This unity is embodied in the Orthodox Church. So they're still saying that the Orthodox Church is unified doctrinally, liturgically, and if you want to really find unity, come back to the original Christian faith, which was to be found in the Orthodox Church.
Even though it's where he was at the time, was he an old calendarist or a new calendarist?
I think he went back and forth depending on. He was part of the ecumenical patriarchate at some points, and some other points he was part of the
which is new calendar.
Which was new calendar, of course, after Metexakis converted them over to it, and so on. But then in let's see, and then in '65 you have the famous unilateral lifting of the anathemas by the Patriarch of Constantinople, Athenagoras, which is condemned by many churches. I mean, how can
you mean other Orthodox
Orthodox churches? That's right. And the Metropolitan Philaret of the Russian Church abroad protests this, and so on. And
that's the former.
He was the head of the Russian Church abroad.
The White Russian Church, as it were.
Yes, that's right.
Tsarist Church.
Yeah, the church that had refused to compromise on the issue of communism, and the participation of the so-called Russian Church in Russia under the Moscow people, who had become basically
complicit
puppets and compromisers with the Soviet regime. Then in 1975, you have the Nairobi Conference, where the Orthodox representatives state that the Orthodox do not expect that other Christians will be converted to Orthodoxy in its historic and cultural reality of the present and past, and to become members of the Orthodox Church.
Well, they realize.
In other words, they're renouncing what we would consider as traditional and genuine Orthodox to be the only way you can engage in any kind of real dialogue, and that is to maintain that the Church has never been lost.
Well, that's because they had argued with these people for years and years and years, explaining what this circle was, what this common understanding of what the faith was, and they wouldn't accept it. And rather than simply walking away and saying these people are not going to listen to this common consensus, they're not interested in returning to this ancient Orthodox practice, they said, well, we still want unity with them, so we're going to agree to disagree, as I said before. Mm-hmm. And the trajectory, as you go through all these dates which Timothy has listed, the trajectory, that means if you follow it out to its logical conclusion, as they progress more and more and move beyond Christianity now to other confessions, move into the pagan, so-called pagan religions, eventually this consensus of belief is going to finally include organizations which have been anti-Christian. And that's at what point, when you...
Do you draw the line?
Do you draw the line? At what point do you come to the conclusion that if you can have people that so disagree with each other that, black is, black and white, positive and negative, how can an institution hold in its structure such diametrically opposing forces and claim to be united?
The only way is for the lowest common denominator and to water everything down so that it doesn't have any significance. And this is the problem. What you have with the World Council of Churches and with the people who are participating in ecumenism is a concept of Christianity without significance.
And without the truth of
without truth.
Founded it.
Without truth. At the same time, in 1975, one of the major bishops in Great Britain, by the name of Theodoros, not to be confused with the patriarch, by the same name, publishes what's called the Thyatira Confession, because he was bishop of that so-called city, or so-called bishop of that city, and which recognizes the priesthoods and the sacraments of heretical denominations, espouses something which we call the branch theory, that all different churches are basically branches of the one church. And then that he admits that Muslims deny the divinity of Christ, but nonetheless they believe in the true God. I mean, these are absolute self-contradictions, and it permits Orthodoxy to have intercommunion with Roman Catholics and Anglicans, and so on. So you see here another major step downward in this path of accepting.
And eventually, they're going to accept, as I said, everything. Anyone that
well, I believe at one of the recent conferences they had some sort of Satanists or something of this kind.
And the Church of Wicca,
participating
in pagan religions. And I'm not going to argue that there's no such thing, that this circle means that if you're outside this church, a lot of people, will fault the Orthodox by saying, well, you claim to be the true Church of Christ, the one that's preserved the truth. Are you now saying that all these other people it's hopeless for them, they're lost in darkness and they're all going to hell?
Oh, yeah.
And the church has never made a statement that can be construed that there's no hope for these people outside the church. And I hope that through our discussions we're not indicating that we're making a judgment on those outside the church, that we're somehow saying, well, if you are not on this circle, you're lost.
No, we leave that basically to the mercy of God.
But
and what we do say is that if you stay within that circle and you follow the precepts of the church, you worship with the church, you learn to pray with the saints, with those who are basically the close friends of God, and as one spiritual father described it to me using your circle, he said that in the center of that circle is God Himself, and the closer you come to God, the closer we come to each other. But that's the correct priority. Not that by becoming closer to each other, we somehow manage to find God.
It's sort of
because we don't know whether we're actually moving towards the center of that circle or whether we're becoming closer by moving off into the periphery.
But it seems like if you are facing man in the heterodox and outside the circle, you'll be closer to that. You step outside the circle, whereas if you turn inward and try to face God and move in that direction, I would imagine that the result would be obvious.
So the point is that if you adhere to what the teachings of the church are, not externally, not out of some sort of compulsion or coercion, which is very much present in the kind of psychology of both the Roman Catholics and the Protestants in the traditional sense of the word, of their teachings and their practices, but out of an inner enlightenment of attaining what we would say would be the image of Christ in your heart and in your soul, and gradually by means of this, you begin to understand, and through praying with the church, you begin to understand what the doctrines are and why they are the way they are, and it's literally like having a light go on. For those of us that have come in from the other confessions, and you begin to understand why Christ said what He said, how He said it, why He said it, and you read the Fathers and their interpretations, and it makes eminent natural sense. It isn't something that you have to force yourself to understand, or say, well, it's a big mystery, so therefore I can't understand it, or I'm not intelligent enough, or I'm not enlightened enough, or I'm not this enough. Gradually you begin to see more and more of that circle. You never see the whole thing.